Imagine for a moment that you're in the market for a new car. You've had your eye on one for a few months now, and your local dealership finally has it in stock in your favorite color, so you decide to pull the trigger and buy it. As you're driving off the lot, you start to notice all sorts of little details you hadn't previously. Tasteful interior appointments, impressive new technology, the works. After about a week of thoroughly enjoying your new vehicle, you take it to the gas station to fill up for the first time. You get out of the car, walk over and open up the gas cap and find out, much to your dismay, that this car doesn't actually run on gas. It runs on recycled vegetable oil. Now this may sound like something completely ridiculous that would never happen in real life. And it is. But believe it or not, this story plays out all the time when people buy new software because they don't take the time up front to understand how that software interacts with the world around it through APIs. Hi, I'm Rob Carrington, and in this episode I'm going to give you 3 tips that you can use when evaluating new software tools to make sure that they will play nicely with your other software and enable you to realize your vision of a connected shop. The first tip actually has nothing to do with APIs or software and has everything to do with you. To borrow a concept from the author Stephen Covey, you need to begin with the end in mind. This concept comes from Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The basic idea is this. You should start any endeavor with a clear understanding of your desired outcome. Visualize what success looks like and define specific goals and objectives before taking action. These specific goals and objectives are your North Star. If you make sure that your actions and decisions are pointing in the direction of your North Star, you will greatly increase your chances of success. All of us are good at identifying a desired outcome when shopping for new software. The mistake many people make is not being specific enough. What exactly do you want the new software to do for you? How exactly do you want it to interact with your other software tools? Take a few minutes and actually write it down. This is an important accountability mechanism because in the next section, you are going to learn how to evaluate an API, and you must evaluate it against something. This is your rubric. The second tip when evaluating a new software tool is to assess the API's coverage. But what does coverage mean in the context of an API? We'll talk about that in this section, but before we do, we need to talk about verbs. Just like in your elementary school grammar class, verbs refer to actions. In this case, actions that a software tool allows you to perform. There are 4 primary verbs that represent the basic building blocks of software: create, read, update, and delete. You can remember them with the acronym CRUD. Creating involves adding net new data to the system. Reading, updating, and deleting refer to operations performed on existing data, fetching, modifying, or removing. This may all sound pretty basic. After all, most software allows you to do CRUD operations with just a few clicks. The beauty of APIs, however, is that they allow you to perform these CRUD operations using an automated computer program without a human in the loop. This can be especially impactful when you want to perform CRUD operations on hundreds or thousands of records at a time. There's one big problem, though. Not all APIs allow you to do everything that you can do in the graphical user interface. Let's get back to the concept of API coverage. API coverage is the fraction of a software's functionality that is made available in the API. An API coverage of 1 means that everything you can do in the user interface can also be done in the API. Broadly speaking, software with a high API coverage is going to get along better with other tools in a connected software ecosystem. Most software has an API coverage of less than 1 because most software is optimized for its human users. Interestingly though, some software actually has an API coverage of more than 1. This means that you can actually do more with the API than you can in the user interface. The Amazon Web Services Management Interface is an example of one such tool. Now that we know what API coverage is, how can we determine an API's coverage? This is where the verbs come in. The first step is to write down what the software allows you to do in the GUI. A good place to start is to identify what kinds of data the software allows you to view or manipulate. For each type of data, figure out which verbs the GUI supports. Usually it's all 4. Next, figure out which verbs the API supports. To do this, pull up the API documentation, navigate to the section for each data type, and check off the supported verbs. If you see some verbs that you don't recognize in the API docs, you can use this cheat sheet to translate. If you're thinking that searching for API docs, combing through them to find the verbs, and creating a checklist sounds like a lot of work, you're right. It really can be. But in the next section, I'm going to tell you a few ways that you can do this much more efficiently, so stay tuned. Once you've run through your entire checklist, you'll have a sense of the API coverage for that software. Note that calculating API coverage is an inexact science, and the number itself is not really that important. The point of this exercise is to understand what an API can and cannot do. Now that you've got your checklist done, let's put it all together. You may have noticed that the title of this video talks about picking the right API for the job and not picking the right software tool for the job. That was intentional, but it seems a little backwards, doesn't it? Let's return to the car analogy from the start of the video to see why this makes sense. In this hypothetical example, the problem was not the car, which was well designed for its intended purpose. The problem was that the car's capabilities did not align with our expectations, and we only discovered that after buying the car. The way to avoid this predicament, and the third tip in this video, is to flip the script. Evaluate the API first, before you get too invested in the software. What are the API's capabilities? How do those stack up against your expectations? If you perform these steps up front, you will avoid being surprised by a mismatch between the software's capabilities and your expectations. Some software tools don't even have an API, which is something you want to know as early as possible in the evaluation process. Most people leave this analysis to the end of the process or don't do it at all. This is a great way to make an expensive mistake. Now, it's entirely possible that you don't have a future vision of connecting the software tool with others, and that's great. In that case, this whole exercise will take you all of 10 seconds. It's also possible that after you perform this analysis, you may decide to change your expectations and future vision. That's also valid. The key is this: by being proactive, you put yourself in a position to make a decision rather than have that decision made for you down the road. If you're new to this, the process of evaluating an API may seem daunting. And if you're anything like me, you probably like finding shortcuts to make tasks more efficient. Here are a few tips to help you evaluate APIs more easily. Number 1, use AI. AI tools like ChatGPT are excellent for information retrieval. It's like a Google search on steroids. Ask ChatGPT to summarize the capabilities of an API. The response will be in plain English, and if you want to investigate further, you can just ask it for a link to the API documentation. I highly recommend experimenting with different prompts to see how much of the work you can get the AI to do for you. Number 2, ask for help. Software companies exist to serve their customers. If you send your requirements to the software vendor, they should have someone on staff who can help determine whether the API can do what you need. That person is usually called a sales engineer, solutions engineer, or solutions architect. Number 3, use a tool like Zapier. Zapier is an automation platform that connects with hundreds of other software applications. Zapier's integration may not cover every feature of an API, but it only takes a few minutes to check what Zapier does provide, so it's a great place to start. I recommend that everyone takes the time to at least learn the basics of what a tool like Zapier can do for you. In my next video, I will teach you how to use Zapier to automate your front office. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious.